Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Elizabeth Aaron. Here we are in the middle of August. How did that come up so fast? Every year I was always so excited about the summer blockbusters, and this year the idea of a blockbuster looks so different. I've had chats with friends and family over Zoom, or I've seen things said on social media about what people have been streaming online lately, but there's not much more than that. Today, though, in honor of the blockbuster, I'm going to focus on movies that have come out recently, or at least in 2020, that are now available on Netflix. So in the first segment of the show, I'm going to be talking about the movie The Lost Husband, and this came out on April 10th. In the second segment of the show, I'm going to be looking at the movie Shine Your Eyes, which is very recent. It came out just on July 29th. In the third segment of the show, I'll be sharing my thoughts on the movie The Stand at Paxton County. This one came out on May 2nd. And then stick around to the end of the show when I'm going to be talking about the movie put out by Netflix called All the Bright Places, which came out on February 28th. Now let's dive on in. As I mentioned, I'm going to start with the movie The Lost Husband. This movie is PG-13. It has suggestive references. It's an hour and 50 minutes long. It's a movie that's based on a book, and it's a drama. The book it's based on is also called The Lost Husband. It's a novel, and it's by Catherine Center. The movie was directed by Vicky White, and she actually adapted the screenplay from the book. And she has directed mostly short movies, but her longest movie is called The Volunteer, which came out in 2013. The movie stars as the protagonist Leslie Bibb. She plays Libby Moran. She was in the movies Iron Man, Miss Nobody, and Running with the Devil. She won a Best Actress award at the Boston Film Festival for the movie Miss Nobody. This movie also stars Josh Duhamel. He's known for such television shows as Crossing Jordan and Las Vegas, and he's been in such movies as Win a Date with Tad Hamilton, Transformers, When in Rome, and You're Not You. He has won a Daytime Emmy Award for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Drama Series for All My Children. Interestingly, both Josh Duhamel and Leslie Bibb were born in North Dakota. And what a nice surprise for me that Nora Dunn is also starring in this movie. I think of her as being so much more of a comedic actor, but in this case, I think she did an amazing job in a drama. She's been in a lot of television, starting back in the mid-1980s on Saturday Night Live, and being on television series such as The Nanny and Entourage. She's also been in movies like The Guilt Trip, It's Complicated, and The Answer Man. And lastly, I want to point out that Isaiah Whitlock Jr. was in this movie. He was recently in Spike Lee's To Five Bloods, and boy does he have a different role in this movie. He does have a pretty small role in this movie, but he has done some great work in the past, so I thought he was worth mentioning. He's been in BlacKkKlansman, Pieces of April, and Goodfellas. The Netflix summary about this movie says, looking to start anew, a widow retreats with her children to her aunt's goat farm, where the ranch's manager helps her navigate country life and loss. That is pretty accurate. There is also a lot about family history in this movie that adds some good twists. A lot about this movie feels very formulaic to me. From the get-go, we have this mom with her two kids who land at her aunt's home. This is an aunt who she's estranged from, but she can no longer tolerate living with her mother, so she goes to the country and lands on this goat farm. As it turns out, her husband has died tragically in a car accident, and she is widowed and has lost everything, pretty much. So she needs to start all over and find her way. And before you know it, her aunt is having her work on the farm and being trained by the strong, single, divorced ranch manager. It's pretty much a setup. And tragically, she is not ready to start dating anyone. She's not really interested. And the question is he past his divorce long enough to be able to be interested in her? I did not see a ton of chemistry between Libby, the widow, and O'Connor, the divorced farm manager, but that kind of made it all more natural for it to grow. Now, O'Connor is really frustrated that Libby has come on board and he has to train her. It's clear that she has no experience or penchant for farm work. And she herself has a lot of doubts. She was not planning to stay at her aunt's for a long time necessarily. She wants to keep her options open as she figures out what her next step in life is going to be. But life on the farm is certainly different. Her children have to get used to the idea that there's no television, there's no dishwasher, there is no dryer to dry the clothes. And Aunt Jean, who is the aunt who owns this goat farm, who is played by Nora Dunn, she is quite a character, and she will just say what is on her mind. She also is a little pushy. She makes clear what she wants to have happen, and she doesn't accept anything less. So you are there on her terms for sure. At the beginning of the movie, it seems like Libby really has her act together. She has a minivan, she seems well enough off, she has these two beautiful children, she seems organized and to be enjoying the drive out to the ranch. But soon she's to be on unknown territory, and she hasn't seen her aunt since she was a young child, so she really doesn't quite know what to expect. But she figures anything is better than her mother, who is pretty dysfunctional, dates lots of men, drinks a lot, and it just seems all around self-centered and insensitive to the needs of her daughter and her grandchildren. And as we get to know Libby, though, her character develops in a really interesting way. She seems to become more anxious. She freaks out about things a lot more. She shows that she's pretty worried about what other people think of her. And she kind of seems all around insecure. Now that I wasn't expecting. And frankly, it was a little refreshing. She seemed pretty human, although kind of inconsistent. O'Connor, on the other hand, he has a stubborn streak. He seems a little bit like a know-it-all. He comes across as kind of this macho man, and he doesn't have a lot of patience, at least with Libby. Now when it comes to her kids, he has a blast with them. She, on the other hand, has some misgivings about the time he's spending with them because he's putting notions into their minds that are not in line with her values. The thing about these two is they really do not share a lot of values, and this keeps them in conflict. But the fact is, over time, they start coming together, and I have to say I am scratching my head about that. They have some shared experiences, but he has treated her quite poorly throughout this movie. There is a point where they accidentally get locked into a freezer. This is a freezer that is in a barn, and it's where they store all the chèvre, the cheese that they get from the goats. He was working on fixing the lock on the door, and it's the middle of the night, and Libby is up, she can't sleep, she hears some noise, she goes in and tries to stop what she thinks is maybe some kind of vandalism or a robbery happening, and the door slams shut and they are locked in. So, frankly, this is the kind of scene that I have seen before. Not super original. And he is angry at her for unintentionally locking the door. And at one point, he takes a potato sack that she can wrap herself in to get warm and throws it at her head. And she doesn't say anything. I mean, it would have been one thing if he had just tossed it to her and she caught it. And I get that they're working to create some kind of drama here between the two of them. But that to me really seemed to cross a line of being inconsiderate. And I think at the very least, she should have called him on that. And they should have had some kind of discussion which would help the audience understand how they could possibly eventually come together. There is another scene where the two of them go to the city. And by the way, this is taking place in Texas, and I believe that they are going to a farmer's market in Houston, where Libby had actually been living, and she runs into 3 women that she knows. and they end up copping to the fact that they often come to the farmer's market so they can get a glimpse of O'Connor. When I heard that line, I was like, oh, please. That was a little bit too far-fetched for me. I could get that they'd go to the farmer's market every week, and that maybe one of them might have a secret crush on him or something like that. But for the three of them to make their main purpose for coming to the farmer's market to see him, I did not buy that at all. It was a huge setup for them to come over to this particular booth at the farmer's market and then see Libby and ask her what she's up to and why is she wearing overalls and why does she have pigtails? Well, Libby gets super insecure. And when O'Connor gets wind of the fact that these three women who are pretty shallow are passing judgment on Libby and demonstrate that he has some skin in the game, well, he does something that leads them to believe that they don't have a chance with him because he is now involved with Libby. So here he has come to the rescue. But frankly, he does it in a way that is really off-putting. There's something about it that to me reminds me of some kind of trashy romance novel from years ago. This does not have 2020 values. And then there's a point where Libby's daughter keeps getting into fights with this boy at school, and she keeps getting suspended. And through this process, we see Libby learn to stand up to the principal, and we also see O'Connor again come to the rescue, and he protects Libby's daughter against this little bully. And he does it by scaring this kid. And while on one hand, I see that it could definitely work, there's a setup about O'Connor constantly taking his manly power and thrusting it about. And although there are moments where he shows a more tender side, for example, he takes care of his ex-wife who has had some health issues, the chip he has on his shoulder is pretty off-putting, I think. So getting back to the main story, this is really a journey for Libby to figure out what she's going to do with the rest of her life. And through this journey, she ends up stumbling onto an old house that is in complete deterioration, but that seems super familiar to her. It turns out that her Aunt Jean is dating Russ, played by Isaiah Whitlock Jr., and his granddaughter seems to be tuned into something otherworldly, and she ends up befriending Libby, and they go to have a little seance at this decrepit house. And Libby can't seem to keep away from this house. She keeps exploring it and finding things that are familiar, and she learns this house that is on the ranch is part of her family history. And as memories come flooding back, she confronts Jean about what happened in the past. And when she learns the details, then she confronts her mother and tries to really get to the bottom of the truth. And I appreciate that this is a conundrum that she has been trying to piece together and is probably at the root of a lot of her anxiety and her issues, her insecurity. But I felt the script really missed the mark in creating a circumstance that helped the audience really have an emotional response to what Libby is learning about her past. I think there's a lot of telling and not showing. There were flashbacks in the movie that did attempt to show what had happened in the past, but there weren't a lot of new memories or revelations that Libby had that helped us relate to her. On one hand, I really enjoyed that this journey that Libby is on is messy. She's trying to figure it out as she goes along, and we as the audience go on this trip with her, and we get to feel her moments of embarrassment and her moments of awkwardness throughout this entire time in her life where she is at her aunt's. On the other hand, the messiness that we see feels more like it's due to the holes in the script and inconsistent direction than with the story and how it actually plays out. I felt this movie wasn't quite deciding what it wanted to be. At first it just started out with Libby trying to find her way in life. Then it becomes a pseudo-love story. Will she and O'Connor see eye to eye and actually form a love connection? And then there's the part about Libby getting past the death of her husband. And then there's the part about Libby unearthing her family history and how that impacts her. And by doing that, things tie up nicely in the bow at the end. But I didn't feel that all of the things that led up to that actually succeeded in earning that ending. So that's the story part of things. I have to say I wasn't completely satisfied, but it was fun to watch, and despite its flaws, I was entertained and I did get something out of it. In terms of the acting, now this movie has some really great actors, and I felt that the acting was pretty good for the most part. I felt the standout roles with Josh Duhamel Even though I really didn't care for his character, he came across very strong, and I appreciated that. His character was pretty consistent throughout the entire piece, and I found that when there was a scene with him in it, I just couldn't help but watch him. There's something about him that dominated the scene, and to me that shows that he was really showing up in his role. And now the big surprise for me was Nora Dunn, and I had mentioned earlier, she's known mostly for comedic roles. Looking at her filmography on the Internet Movie Database, I see that she has been in some drama television shows. I had not seen them, so it's just been some time since I've seen her, and maybe I'd missed something. But in any case, she was terrific. Her character was completely believable. I appreciated how she had a harshness about her, which totally makes sense for somebody who would be owning a farm and trying to make ends meet. Aunt Jean had a big heart, clearly, and there were nuances to her character. So on reflection, this movie had a Hallmark quality to it, or was kind of like a soap opera in some ways. There was a lot of people talking and not a lot of action actually happening. And that can be super challenging for an actor. It really does help when there are other things going on, actual activities that they're involved in. And so for what these actors were actually given, I think, especially with Nora Dunn, she did a great job of pulling off a character that you're engaged with, even though she wasn't necessarily doing a whole lot. I found the casting was pretty interesting. All of these characters seemed very distinct. Now, I think it's interesting that Russ is a black character who plays the boyfriend of Jean. On one hand, no big deal was made about this relationship, and I appreciated that. It created some level of normalcy. On the other hand, based on what is happening in the world today, it did seem strange that there was not some level of acknowledgement about the fact that they're a mixed-race couple. It felt a bit to me like there was a missed opportunity there, or perhaps it filled the opportunity just by simply having this couple. I didn't feel like there was a lot of chemistry between them, but it was clear that they had known each other for many years. So I'm not sure exactly where I stand on that, but it did feel like it was worth mentioning. A message that I did appreciate about this movie is that it doesn't matter how old you are, it's never too late to figure things out and grow up, that you can be confused at any age. Even when you're an adult, you are still figuring things out. And this movie normalized that for everybody who was in the movie. Each of them seems to have had some kind of pain point that it had to work through. Some of it was emphasized more than others, and clearly this is Libby's story, and this is mostly about the big pains that she's gone through, but no one in this movie was immune to that. And that certainly is a positive. I think you'd like this movie if you are interested in what life is like on a farm, a goat farm in particular. There are some quite beautiful scenes, and touching scenes even, with just the animals on the farm. You may be interested in this movie if you like stories that are about people working on themselves and working issues out. It did have some of these redeeming qualities. And it is entertaining in and of itself. A bit predictable, a bit formulaic, but it did have some redeeming value. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a fantastic movie, I would split this right in the middle and just give it a 5. In many ways, I didn't find this movie super realistic, and as I said before, it was entertaining nonetheless, as long as I could get past the things that just seemed way out of left field. Now stay tuned for the next segment of the show when I will be looking at the movie Shine Your Eyes after the break.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Thanks for joining the second segment of the show. I am your host, Elizabeth Aaron, and in the last segment, I talked about the movie The Lost Husband. I'm now going to discuss the movie Shine Your Eyes. This movie is rated TV MA for mature audiences as there is some sexual content, nudity, and smoking. It's an hour and 42 minutes long. It's a drama and is considered an international drama. And this is something that I really am intrigued about with this movie. There are many languages spoken within it. There's a lot of subtitles, and it takes place in Brazil, in particular around the Sao Paulo area. The summary that Netflix has for this movie is, a Nigerian musician travels to Brazil to search for his estranged brother, who is living a life very different than the one his family thought. And I think that is a pretty apt description. It was directed by Matheus Mariani, and he actually hasn't directed all that much. This is his first major feature project, other than a couple of documentaries, a TV movie, and a short film. And this movie stars O.C. Ukeji, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He is originally from Nigeria, and he's been in movies such as Spotlight, The Royal Hibiscus Hotel, and Heaven's Hell. And the movie stars Chukwudi Iwuji. He's been on some television shows, including Designated Survivor and The Split, and he's been in the movies Fall to Rise, Barry, John Wick Chapter 2, and Extent, which is a short film, but he won Best Actor for that movie at the Mounfield Film Festival in Los Angeles and the Olympus Film Festival. This movie has a real independent feel to it, and the whole story, it feels like it starts with a breath in, and then ends with a breath out. That's kind of how it builds. It's a quiet movie that builds slowly, 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 and then we get to a crescendo, and it's like there's a big exhale. And in that exhale, everything that had been wound up at the beginning kind of winds down. And it does it in a pretty natural way, and there's something actually pretty beautiful about it. The story starts when we see two boys who are brothers, we find out. It's back in Nigeria in 1988. You see them running down a country road, and then there is a particular moment where they are kind of engaged in a quiet, meditative staring contest. And in these few moments, much is revealed about these two characters. It seems like very little is happening here, and yet, on some deeper level, these two characters are affected by their connection. And adding to that, family is very important, and there's something super traditional and almost mystical that seems to be true for the family of these two brothers. We don't actually see much of the immediate family, but the younger brother, Amadi, he has a recording of his mother saying how much she wants the older brother, Ikenna, to come home. Ikenna has been in Sao Paulo, Brazil for some time, and he has been out of touch. Now, there is an uncle and aunt that live in Sao Paulo, and this is a connection for Amadi and Ikenna, but the uncle has not seen Ikenna in a long time, and the family has not heard from him. So Amadi has come to Sao Paulo to see if he can find his brother. And this is the journey of this movie. We are there with Amadi to see if he will find his brother. Now, in most cases, when someone comes to see a family member, it's pretty straightforward. You fly into the country, you meet them at the airport, and then you spend time with them. This is by far the case with Amadi and Ikenna. Little did Amadi expect, but he is on a fact-finding mission. He's kind of become a detective. He follows all these different clues to try to get to the bottom of where Ikenna might be. And this proves particularly difficult because he doesn't speak Portuguese, which is the main language in Brazil. So he's in a strange country, with a strange language, where he knows hardly anybody. And this movie has a lot of languages in it. There's Igbo, which comes from Nigeria, where Amadi is originally from, and this is the main language that he often speaks with his uncle. Then Amadi also knows English. And there's a lot of people there who speak English, or English is the second language, so he has a way of communicating with them to an extent. And most people speak Portuguese, and he has to find a way to communicate with them. And sometimes it is just impossible. One thing that I like about this film is that as Amadi is going through to figure out where his brother is, each clue seems like a very natural progression. For example, There is an internet cafe that is in the mall where his uncle's shop is. His uncle and aunt have a shop where they sell hair extensions and wigs and things like that. So there are moments where we see Amadi working with his uncle and helping him out, putting price tags on things, but then he will go to this internet cafe, and at first he is looking to see if he can get some more clues from emails that Ikenna has sent him. He has his own laptop, and he connects it to the internet in this cafe. He goes to this cafe a few times, and then when he is purchasing more time, he notices a laptop on a shelf. Normally, a laptop looks just like a laptop and is hard to tell from any other laptop. But in this case, there is a bold red sticker that appears to be the name of a particular band, and it looks like it's a Nigerian band. He asks the person at the desk if he can see the computer because he believes that it's his brother's. The person at the desk explains that it was left for repairs and that the person didn't have the money to pay for it and never came back to claim it. So Amadi pays for the repairs for the computer. Now, in today's day and age, I did find it surprising that this internet cafe person would just hand over the computer. There was no proof necessarily that Amadi was the brother. On the other hand, he did pay for it, and money speaks. And then he has the computer. Now, also, you'd think that there would be some password, but it does seem he can have full access to the computer. However, when he does get into the computer, it puts out all kinds of clues. It's a really amazing, elaborate puzzle of all these different themes that are showing up on the computer. And this gives Amadi lots of avenues to go down to see if any of these are going to help him find out more information about where his brother might be. And let me add, this comes after Amadi has actually tried to go to a place where he believes his brother had been a professor of statistics. This is the scene that shows up in the trailer of the movie. He believes he had seen his brother go into a building that he thought was connected to a university, and he climbs flights and flights of stairs because the elevator is all booked up. Breathless, he makes it to the floor where he believes that his brother's office might be. He asks at the reception desk, and this is not a university as it turns out. And here we see Amadi just scratching his head, wondering, how can it be so hard to find his brother? Where could he be? So with the laptop, he has lots of avenues, as I said, to go down and see if he can indeed locate his brother. One of those avenues is the horse races. It seems that Ikenna had taken to betting on horses and had lost quite a bit of money. And this is pretty unsettling because if he doesn't have money, where could he be? Well, at the horse races, it turns out that Amadi chats with a guy, and that guy often goes to the horse races and had actually become friends with Ikenna. So this man ends up befriending Amadi, and they spend quite a bit of time together, and clues keep showing up about the connection that they have with Ikenna. And Amadi finds out that Ikenna has shared information that is not necessarily accurate with this man. Ikenna has actually left many notes and all kinds of scribbles and sketches and information with this man. And so Amadi takes the information and once again has even more to pull from to explore to see if he can find his brother. He searches for places where his brother may have lived, people that he knew, things that he had done. As Amadi tries to find his brother, we see him have sleepless nights and continue to try and puzzle out what this is about. There's an important scene where we see Amadi with his uncle, and his uncle shares information about how the superstitions about the family may be incorrectly impacting Amadi, but Amadi still isn't sure. He has some belief in the superstitions that come with his family, the mysteries and the traditions. And through the movie, there is this ongoing test as to whether or not what the uncle believes and says is the truth, or if the superstitions and mysteries around his family are the actual truth. As Amadi pieces things together in order to find his brother, he's meeting all the same people that Ikenna had met. And in a way, he's reliving Ikenna's life. And this actually supports some of the superstition within his family. Not only does he spend time with this man who he met at the horse races that had been a friend of Ikenna's, but he also connects with this woman. She's an employee at his uncle's shop. He sees that Ikenna had had some kind of romantic relationship with her, And he himself is interested in her, but he is not sure what line he can cross. He doesn't know how extensive the relationship was that Ikena had with her. There's a really fun scene where we see him have lunch with her. She speaks no Igbo or English, and so they're using a cell phone translation app. This is how they're communicating as they sit at a table across from each other. And this creates some really great subtext, because we get to see what they type, if they decide to keep the question that they typed or they choose to erase it. And this shows us what their personal motivations may be around the other person. I thought it was a really unique and creative way to clue the audience into what is really going on under the surface. There are also moments when it looks like Amadi has seen his brother and he goes chasing after him and the brother just disappears. As a member of the audience observing all of this, seeing Amadi have such a hard time, there are moments that I am not convinced that Ikena actually exists. There are moments that I thought maybe this was a complete setup to fool Amadi somehow. I really didn't know which direction this movie was going to go, and in that way it kept me intrigued. I wondered what kind of plot twist was going to be happening next, and I kept wondering if Amadi in any way was getting closer to Ikena. He certainly was getting closer to his brother in concept, because as he met more and more people who knew him, he learned more about what his brother had been up to, how he'd been living his life. And yet he was so elusive. He had touched all of these people, and yet Amadi still couldn't connect with him somehow. But by living vicariously through the steps and the people that Ikena had met, Amadi got to know his brother. Got to know the things that are important to his brother in his life. And yet he started feeling pressure on the fact that here he'd been in Brazil for quite a amount of time. He'd met these people and was forming relationships with them. It was almost becoming his own home. But his mother really wanted Ikena to come home, and he was there for a job. And he was getting lost in the culture and in all the people there, and it was keeping him from doing what he needed to set out to do. So eventually we see him get back on task. And I'm just going to leave it there. Otherwise I'll be giving away what actually happens, whether he finds his brother or not. If he ever makes it back to Nigeria, you need to watch the movie to get those questions answered. I will say that what happens over time, I did predict. I don't know if that would be true for everybody. I have seen movies that end up having a similar theme, so that's how I picked up on what was going on. But regardless, the way it is handled is very personal, very intimate, very real. This was not a Hollywood movie at all. Yet it's a really good story, intriguing, caring. It opened me up to how different cultures operate. And I also liked that this was a man's story and it was about brothers. And I don't see a lot of movies that are specifically about brothers. It's also about family obligation, tradition. Just has a lot of wonderful themes throughout that tie everything together. These values seem to be a kind of net for this relationship with these brothers and other family. And this was done in a way that I don't think I can say I've seen before. I also liked that as Amadi searched for his brother and he met these different people, he himself made connections with people, and he ended up enjoying the culture along the way. We see him at a party. We see him jamming on music instruments with a few people. He is not so single-minded on his brother that he doesn't get a taste or flavor of the world that he is now immersed in. I liked the acting in this quite a bit also. The camera is on Amadi, again played by O.C. Akeje, and he is very focused. I felt like I always knew what he was thinking. I felt like I was right there by his side. I felt compassion for him. I went on his ups and downs emotionally with him, so he did a really great job. And Chukwudi Iwuja, who plays Ikena, although he is mostly seen in little snippets here and there, he is very compelling on screen, and he has a super strong presence. So I felt this movie was well cast with these two as brothers. I feel this movie was well done, and it had a lot of good messages. For me personally, did I love this movie? I can't say that I did. It's not the kind of movie where I would say, you have to see this movie. But if you're looking for a movie that has an international flavor to it, and I would also add that has mental health issues connected to it that I didn't dive into, but I think better left unsaid until you see the movie, then this movie would be of interest to you. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a most excellent movie, how would I rate this? I'd give it a 7. It's a solid movie. Good acting, good story, no complaints. Just for me personally, I wasn't super compelled by the story. I did feel it required some patience to watch it and to muddle through all of it, because it is a long, slow, arduous process for Amadi to figure out what is going on with his brother. I would say that these actors and this director are probably up and coming, and that we'll be seeing more quality stuff from them in the future. Now stay tuned for the next segment of the show when I'll be looking at the movie The Stand at Paxton County after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome to the third segment of the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron. And in the last segment, I talked about the movie Shine Your Eyes. I'm now going to discuss the movie The Stand at Paxton County. This movie is an hour and 42 minutes long. It's rated R as there is some violence and language. The Netflix description of this is, she defended her country on the front line. Now the veteran faces combat on the frontier to protect her father's home. That is a simple description, but it is accurate. This movie is inspired by true events, and it is considered a drama and also social issues drama. This movie is directed by Brett Hadland, and he mostly has editing credits to his name. This is actually the first movie he has directed, but he did win the Gold Award at the World Fest Houston for 3 Days in the Hole, and that was for Best Short Film. This movie stars Jacqueline Taboni as Jana Connolly. She is the protagonist, and she has mostly been in television. She has starred on Major Crimes, Grimm, and Easy. And she's also been in The L Word, Generation Q. These are all TV series. This movie also stars Michael O'Neill. He is a familiar face, but rarely have I seen him as a main character. He's been in Dallas Buyers Club, Transformers, and Seabiscuit. He's also been in the TV series Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan and Council of Dads. And starring in this movie is Tyler Jacob Moore. He's also been in quite a bit of television, including shows Private Practice, Rules of Engagement, NCIS Los Angeles, and Shameless. He's been in the movies Don't Look Back, Mr. Sandman, and Pray for Rain. At the opening of this movie, we see Jana Connolly. She appears to be a doctor, and she is in Afghanistan treating a wounded soldier. And she is solid. She is focused, she is in control, she is aware of what is going on every second, and she is also very much keeping this wounded soldier in mind, offering him a joke and trying to keep him at ease. She is a class act. Next, we break to Paxton County, North Dakota. where we are following the voiceover on a radio that is on in a car, and that car is being driven by Josh Falvey. He is with the Fergus Falls Daily, and he is going to do an article on exactly what is being talked about on the radio. There is a new law that has been passed called Title 23, and it is about protecting animals from potentially dangerous situations. Josh is heading up to a ranch where he got an anonymous tip that something was going on with the animals up there. He is heading to Old Hoag's ranch, and this is where we see Michael O'Neill's character, Del Connolly, who is Jana's father. He's helping Old Hoag out and making sure that the animals have everything they need after a long winter. He's working on the hay with his friend Tom. And the police show up, the sheriff in particular, casting doubt on Old Hoag about how he has fared this winter and taking care of the animals. He's wondering if indeed the animals are in compliance or not. The reporter arrives and snoops around, and pretty much simultaneously, we hear a gunshot. At the same time, it turns out that Del Connolly is having a heart attack. There is a lot to unwind on what is just going on here. In a flash, we are back in Afghanistan, where we see Jana Connolly getting a call from her best friend saying that she needs to come home and take care of her dad. And the story unwinds from here. As soon as Jana comes home, she bumps into a person she had gone to high school with. It's a guy named Carl Hagen, who now happens to be the deputy of Paxton County. There's definitely a chemistry between him and Jana, but things seem a little complicated because he is a deputy. Next, Jana heads home, and she gets to see the horse, Jack. That was her beloved horse. She meets a new ranch hand that her father had hired, whose name is Brock McCarty. And then she sees her dad, who is sacked out in a chair in front of the TV, which is, as we learn, not his normal way of life. He gets very frustrated not being able to do anything. And on one hand, he doesn't want to be taken care of, and on the other hand, Jana doesn't want to be home. And then there's history between them. When Jana's mother died when she was a young teen, she ended up picking up a lot of the slack on the farm, and she still holds some level of resentment at her dad for that. And meanwhile, her dad doesn't necessarily like the way that she can be a little pushy. Through the rest of the movie, what we see is a continual challenge to remove the animals from the Connolly farm. Now, the Connollys have been farmers for a long time, and they know how to do their job. When the police come with the county vet, they make lists of things that could potentially put animals in harm's way, but these are things that Brock should have taken care of. And not in the too distant future, we see that Brock just abandons his job. He leaves, no note, no nothing, all of his stuff is gone. This leaves the Connollys short-handed, and it leaves them with extra work to do just between Jana and then her dad, who is not in a place to take on a lot of work. This is a big challenge, and they have to find extra help. And it turns out they do, and I'm not going to give away who the person is, but they are able to hire a hand. And there is an interesting connection here that makes the story even more compelling. There are a lot of emotional moments in this movie. With the health of the animals being challenged by the county, a decision has to be made about a horse named Jack. This is the horse that Jana first saw when she came home. She has a long-time relationship with the horse, as does her dad. This happened to be the horse that belonged to her mother before she died. In some ways, the horse represents the mother. And if the horse goes away, it's just one more blow to this family, one more loss that's really hard for them. And then a mystery pops up around the Hoag ranch. Earlier I mentioned that there was a gunshot at the ranch, and it turns out that Mr. Hoag, who had owned the ranch, had died, apparently by suicide. But the greater the pressure the county keeps putting on the Connolly family, as they keep finding more and more things wrong that is going to require them to let go of their farm and their animals, the deeper Jana gets into it, wanting to get to the bottom of what is really going on here. She works with her best friend, who happens to be a veterinarian. She works with her dad and the new hired hand, and they hire a lawyer. And through their secretive investigations, they get that something is not on the up and up here. And eventually, Mr. Connolly even gets arrested. And he is told that he could take a lesser plea, but that would result in him having to give up all of his animals. So in doing her detective work, Jana ends up at Josh Falvey's office at the Fergus Falls Daily. She pushes him at what really happened at the Hoag farm that day when he went there to report about the new law. She realized there were some holes in his story, and that it seemed like maybe he was hiding something. he reveals some new information that really helps her know which direction to move in next in order to make sure that her family's farm gets saved. And in the process, she gets Josh Falvey as a new ally. I'm not going to give away what happens at the end, but I will say that there is a culmination of actions that happen, and each of these actions demonstrates on what side of the law each of the characters is at, what their motivations truly are, and what the stakes are. And they are high. There is some violence here, as well as high drama. Earlier in the movie, things unfold in kind of a quiet manner, but then they culminate in this really intense part that is much more like a thriller. And I will say that it is highly fortunate that Jana has the training that she does from being in the military. As soon as this movie started, I got pretty excited, and it's because I could tell right away this was a quality movie. The acting was solid, and the story, everything just seemed to fit together really well. There was a reason for everything. And because from the very beginning I wasn't worried about how well the actors were going to perform, or how the story was probably going to hold up, I could really just kick my feet back and enjoy the movie. I will say that there were some moments, as I mentioned earlier, that were very emotional and that were painful. I do believe these scenes were necessary. They were not gratuitous, and at the same time they were hard to watch. I'm not sure how this movie could have carried out without them, and yet I wish they had not been so hard. The good news is that there are also some really lovely moments, some touching moments, as well as even some humorous moments that help break up some of the more painful scenes. There's a lot of humor in the way Jana meets the new ranch hand. I would say that it was a little bit predictable, but because everything was going along so well, that was something that was really easy for me to forgive. I also appreciated that there seemed something very real about this story. I felt like I was down on the farm with the Connollys, that I was part of their family and had an inside glimpse into what was really going on for them. And frankly, I was pretty impressed, as I said, with the acting. These actors were solid, their characters were clear, their motivations were clear, and most of them were very new to me, so I was impressed. There was a believability about them that helped make everything flow so easily in this movie. Now, I will say that towards the end, when these big dramatic scenes are happening, the sheriff in particular had a major role, and as the stakes got higher, he became a little over the top, and I found him a little bit less believable. But acting is hard, and I think it is a very minor criticism. When you're in the flow of the movie, you're probably not going to notice it. It's just something that I was attuned to. And I appreciated also in this movie what the relationship was like for Jana and her father. They had ups and downs. They had emotional history that they needed to deal with. And as together, in a team, they navigated what was going on with the county as they both wanted their ranch rescued. They're able to pull together and really look at what each other meant to them. And they got to also celebrate Jana's mother, what her life meant to them, as well as the animals on the ranch. And in some of the more challenging moments, we got to see the emotional range of these characters. They were so believable. When something went badly, I totally bought what their response was. And in particular, I felt Jacqueline Taboni, who plays Jana, was really well cast. She has an energy about her that is a bit harsh. She plays the kind of person you don't want to mess with, and yet you can see that underneath it all, she has kind of a mushy heart. We get to see how she navigates when she lets down her outer guard. There's also a scene where she is hanging out with a ranch hand on a blanket looking up at the stars. This is a scene where I thought, okay, maybe this is finally where the movie is going to fall short. It's going to be sappy and gushy, and it is just going to undo everything that has been done before. And boy, was I pleasantly surprised. This scene was done really, really well. It was matter of fact, there wasn't gushiness, and yet these two characters managed to make a connection. They were talking about the stars, they're talking about things that were meaningful to them, they talked about what home meant to them. It was the moment where we got to see if there might actually be a chance that there's something more to their relationship. So it is lovely when we see these moments that give some relief to all of the hardship that is actually happening. This movie is about an ongoing fight, and yet it's great to see that there's more to life than just the fight. And I felt the story, the way it was crafted, was really masterful. Each scene naturally unfolded to the next. There was no question about why the scene came up, what needed to happen in that scene, and within each scene there was some level of intrigue, wanting to know if something was going to be accomplished the way they needed it to. Were there going to be steps forward or steps backward? I had seen this movie posted on Netflix for a while. It has been up there since early May, and I am a sucker for Westerns, so I was really intrigued, and yet I never quite watched it. Although the scene they use in the trailer is a poignant one, and it does get you intrigued and wanting to know what happened, I felt it did not accurately portray about what this movie really was about. So if you have seen the trailer for this movie and passed it over, I suggest that you do give it another chance because it is a quality film. Something that is interesting about this story is the fact that the county is saying how it wants to make sure animals are treated well, and yet there is something underhanded about it. And in its efforts to potentially see that the animals are treated well, actually the opposite happens. And so in this story, as the Connollys work to rescue their own farm, they actually are able to help save the whole county. And yet the question is, will it last? And can this happen to other counties? Something that is really sweet and is something to look forward to at the end is there is a clip of the actual Del and Jana Connolly talking about going through the incident that happened in the film. Another interesting point in this movie is the fact that Jana is in Afghanistan at the start of the movie. It's hard to know how long she's been serving, but we have a sense that it has been a while. She seems to probably be in her early to mid-30s, I'm going to guess, and she would have had to have some training ahead of time, so it has been a while. And there is such an interesting contrast between what work is like in a war zone and here she is back home, and yet she is faced with a similar kind of struggle, actually. At the very least, it is about a conflict, and it is about what is right and what is wrong. And so there is some irony that what is unfolding happens to have happened to the family that has Jana Connolly in it, because she is the person who is most geared to deal with this kind of conflict. She's physically prepared, she has the knowledge to help people should there be any kind of injury, and she is really smart. We see from the very beginning that she can pretty much handle any situation, she's in control, and she knows how to outwit people. And yet I do like some of the scenes where we see her human side, and she definitely has one. She really is a vulnerable character when all is said and done. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a most excellent movie, where would this movie fall? I would give it a very solid 8. This movie was really buttoned up. The script and story were really tight. I think the cast and crew and director, they were a solid team, and they made a really solid movie. If you want to watch a good, intriguing movie and just want to be swept away to another part of the country, assuming you are not from North Dakota, this movie will do that for you. Now stay tuned for the final segment of the show, when I'll be talking about the movie All the Right Places.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome to the final segment of the show. I am your host, Elizabeth Aaron. In the prior segment, I looked at the movie The Stand at Paxton County. In this segment, I'm going to talk about the movie All the Bright Places. This movie is rated TVMA, which means it's for mature audiences. It is 1 hour and 48 minutes long, and it is a Netflix movie, meaning Netflix is the producer. This movie was directed by Brett Haley. He has won awards at the Sarasota Film Festival over the years. In 2018, he was the Audience Award winner for Best Narrative Feature Film for Hearts Beat Loud. And in 2010, he won the same award for the movie The New Year. And Hearts Beat Loud also won at the Traverse City Film Festival and Wisconsin Film Festival. He's mostly known for directing short films and TV episodes. He's directed episodes of the series Barmaids and No Limits. And he did direct the movies I'll See You in My Dreams, Hero, and as mentioned before, Hearts Beat Loud. This movie stars Elle Fanning, and she's been nominated for a number of awards over the years, and she's been the winner of a number of ensemble awards, including for the Behind the Voice Actors Awards for The Box Trolls, and the International Online Cinema Awards for The Beguiled. She also won the Best Actress Award for the movie Low Down at the Karlovy Vary International Film Festival. She has been in a lot of television, but she's known for the movies I Am Sam, Daddy Daycare, Reservation Road, Phoebe in Wonderland, and Trumbo. She is currently in the television series Catherine, and in this movie she plays the character, our protagonist, Violet Markey. Also in this movie is Justice Smith. He plays Theodore Finch, and arguably he has more scenes than Elle Fanning does. He's been in a lot of television, including the TV series The Get Down and Acting for a Cause, and he's been in movies like Triggerfinger, Paper Towns, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, and Every Day. And this movie stars Luke Wilson. He plays Violet's father, and he is also an award winner. He won Best Actor for the short film Satellite Beach in 2014 at the High Desert International Film Festival. He's been in movies like Bottle Rocket, Legally Blonde, The Royal Tenenbaums, 3:10 to Yuma, and Death at a Funeral. And I also want to mention another actor who is in a supporting role. It's Keegan-Michael Key. He is an Emmy Award-winning actor. He shared his Emmy with an ensemble for Outstanding Variety Sketch Series for Key and Peele. He plays the guidance counselor, Mr. Embry, in this film, and he's known for movies such as Tomorrowland, the Angry Birds movie, Win It All, and Dolomite Is My Name. This movie is based on a novel by Jennifer Niven. It's a best-selling young adult novel. And this movie is called a teen movie. It's a drama also. The Netflix description is, at her darkest moment, he coaxes her toward light for a life-changing journey of freedom, beauty, and unexpected discoveries. That's a pretty good high-arching description. I'll also say that this movie is dedicated to those with mental health issues, and you can go to the All the Bright Places website to get resources. Even though this movie is described as a teen movie, I would actually err more on the side of it being a drama. I think just about anybody could relate to this movie. It happens to be set with teenagers at a high school. I also think these teens are very advanced in terms of their maturity. And while much of their characters are based on people who haven't figured things out, their approach to figuring it out is with thoughtfulness, sensitivity, and wisdom. It seems like they are older beyond their years. The movie is really about the relationship between Violet and Finch. Violet's older sister, who is Violet's best friend, died in a car accident, and Violet is still grieving. It has been months. She has not been acting normally around her friends. She just can't seem to find a way to break through the fog of the depression, of the sadness, of what life is like without her sister. So one day she decides to stand on a bridge, and she looks like she's contemplating jumping. Then along comes Theodore Finch. He is running, as he often likes to do, with his headphones on, and he sees Violet, and he remembers her from school. So he checks with her to see if everything's okay. And she keeps saying, just go, but he refuses to let her alone. And this is the beginning of a relationship that is being forged. It seems like he probably hadn't paid much attention to her at all before this incident happened, but this made him very intrigued. And so he is on a pursuit to learn more about her, and he sees something in her that he's super curious about. He starts to take action that requires her to pay attention to him. And even though she has friends, and they keep encouraging her to come out to parties and do things with them, she still can't seem to show up in her old self, and they are growing impatient and tired of it. They can't seem to reach her, and she is not accessible to them. But for some reason, Finch is able to connect with her. I think it has to do with the fact that She is so deadened, and he is way on the other end of the scale of aliveness. And in fact, one of the things he feels he needs to do in order to live a valued life is to remain as awake as possible. And so he becomes a polarizing force that helps wake her up too. He pushes her to do things outside of her comfort zone, and this helps her wake up. But also there's an interesting intimacy between them. He has had a lot of pain in his life, and we don't actually learn much about it. And when we do, it's behind the scenes. It's not when he's in front of Violet. He doesn't share his past very much with Violet. Much of their relationship is about him waking her up, protecting her, looking out for her interests. In a way, he's rescuing her. But when he gets his buttons pushed in a certain way and he retreats, he refuses to be rescued. He can kind of dish it out, but he can't take it. But regardless, what he's doing is teaching her how to live. He's also one of the only people who is not scared to talk about her sister, and about her grief, and about how she feels about her sister and what she misses about her. He talks about her sister as if she's there. He wants to be introduced to her. There are lots of really touching moments. He also shows up for Violet in really unique ways. For example, one evening he texts a quotation to her that has a lot of meaning. So she sends a quotation back, and then he sends another one back. And she's waiting for his response. It's sort of a tag, you're it. And she's waiting and getting a little impatient, and then we hear a noise, a pebble at the window. And she looks out, and there he is, throwing pebbles at the window, telling her to come on out. And she can't even help feeling that he is doting on her, that she is worthy of some kind of special attention. And these feelings are a distraction from the grief that she feels, and this helps open up something in her. He also helps see that one depressed feeling or feeling of grief is not how she needs to be in everything, that she has greater capacity than that, and that everybody does if they're willing to access it. Hearing about possibilities like that, and feeling the caring that he is showing her by the attention he dotes on her, it makes a huge difference in her life in terms of what emotions she can access. She's thawing out as a result of his influence. So the premise of this story, we see Finch meet with a guidance counselor at the high school, played by Keegan-Michael Key. And what we learn that Violet doesn't yet know is that Finch is a troubled boy. He gets into lots of trouble. He has troubles with anger and managing it. He refuses to take things seriously. He feels completely understood and doesn't believe anybody can truly deeply understand him. And it seems that something that is so freeing for him is the fact that he has met a young woman who has experienced a deep level of pain. And that is something he can relate to, but also she doesn't yet have a definition for him. He has been seen in the school as a freak, and this really disturbs him. But she doesn't know him as that. In fact, it's not that long before this that her family relocated to Indiana, where the movie is taking place, from California. And so having the freedom to be himself with her, without having this preconceived judgment, seems to really help him in improving himself. Yet he does continue to go into some dark places. And during these times, he just disconnects. And it's very upsetting for her because here she has lost her sister, her best friend, and he's becoming her best friend. And when he doesn't become accessible, it just touches this button of loss, and it makes her very distraught. So we see this relationship forming between them, and it is complex, clearly. They each are pushing each other's buttons in certain ways, and yet they are both loving and growing and appreciating each other. Now we do learn this background about Finch in the guidance counselor's office, but we also see him in a classroom. There is a geography class that he shares actually with Violet. And in the class, the teacher has provided an assignment. There need to be pairs of students who are going to explore parts of Indiana. The premise for this assignment is that the students are going to be going off to college in the next year, and the teacher wants them to see parts of Indiana that they should see before they go off to college, possibly in another state. And so Finch is determined for Violet to be his partner. It takes some time for her to finally say yes, because at first she thinks that she's going to be able to get out of this assignment. She doesn't feel she's up for it. She asks her parents to talk to the teacher, but she is held to be part of this assignment, like it or not. They think that ultimately this is going to be a good experience for her. And so she agrees to be Finch's partner, and they get to go off and explore parts of Indiana. And during this exploration, they learn a lot about each other. And what they discover is, while there's special places within Indiana, there are definitely special places within themselves and each other. And so they make so much more of a discovery than what is expected from the assignment. And the movie is called All the Right Places. And I think that covers both the places that they go to visit, but also the places within themselves that they discover as a result of being together. The acting in this movie was really wonderful. I would say it was even profound. I could really connect to what each of these characters were going through in their personal plights, and I was falling in love with each of the characters as more and more got revealed to them as the two of them made connections. I would say I have seen some movies that have a formula that is similar to this movie, but I don't think any of them that come to memory were as well done. These characters were believable to me. And something that is interesting is that Violet is white and Finch is black. And when I think back to the first movie that I reviewed on this podcast today, The Lost Husband, and there is a relationship between a white woman and a black man, wow, what a difference. In The Lost Husband, it was very surface and it was a peripheral relationship. And in that respect, the fact that it was a black man with a white woman seemed to be very politically correct. To me, it felt like there would be a benefit of explaining why there was a black man dating a white woman. But in this film, because we see from the very beginning how this relationship formed, and the whole movie was based on this relationship, there was no explanation needed, because we could see the characters for who they were, and the color did seem less relevant, because it was part of the character. It just felt worth noting. There's something else interesting in this movie is that Finch is pretty isolated. His mom frequently travels for work. His dad was super abusive when he was young, and as a result, he is in a relationship with his father. He has an older sister, and she is his closest relative, but she works a lot also. She's the one who seems to be most stable and at home. But meanwhile, he is alone a lot. And while he does have some close friends who he hangs out with at school, we don't see him with them all that much when he's on his own. A few times maybe, and that helps make it realistic. But in terms of closeness and being able to let someone in, his sister is probably the main person and Violet comes next. And even with them, he struggles. They offer to help, they offer to listen, and he just can't seem to find the words to open up. And when he does or comes up with some words, it's only words. It doesn't quite get to the feeling that he has that makes life so impossible for him. So I do want to say that this didn't quite add up for me. Here he was so great at being awake and living life the way that he did. He was able to bring Violet back to life. This is an enormous gift and a great capacity. And yet he didn't seem to be able to bring himself back to life when he would go to these dark places. He's a kind of person who seems to have endless hope. So it was very tough to see that maybe he, underneath it all, doesn't have that hope. Like he couldn't quite come to terms with the fact that both could coexist. And yet he is the one who talked about how each person has thousands of possibilities within themselves. So what we learn ultimately is that he is dealing with mental illness, and it's something that Violet eventually understands. And it is this that truly impacts what is going to happen at the end. And I will leave it to you to watch the movie to see what does happen at the end. And frankly, I'm torn about the end and what happens. I'm not going to divulge specifically what happens. I could see how what happened at the end needed to happen. And the fact that this movie was based on a novel, I can see how there was an investment in it ending the way that it did. But I can't help but wonder if the movie could have been just as effective if a different outcome had happened. We do ultimately see, based on the end, that Violet has truly deeply changed, and that she has really been touched by Finch. And this in itself is remarkable. So, as I think I mentioned, the acting is really wonderful. There's a lot of range and emotion. The characters connect really well. I bought pretty much everyone in their particular role. And the story is lovely. There are so many nuances. This goes to some really deep emotional places. I really do love movies that make me feel a lot and even make me cry. I often have this crying test to see how deeply a movie touches me. And I have to say that so many movies lately that I have seen, I feel were on the surface. And it's been some time since I've been touched deeply. I actually cried a little bit with this movie. So to me, that in and of itself means that it is a winner. Something I like about this movie is that not only do we go on a physical journey around Indiana with these two characters, but we do go on a deep emotional movie about each of them as individuals and grappling with the feelings that they have that they don't really know how to contend with, to the emotions of being in a connected relationship where they grow to really love and enjoy each other. And the connection that they have really came about very naturally. It was very believable. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a most excellent movie, I would give this movie a 9. I do think there are some very minor flaws, but in terms of a story that sweeps you away, it highly succeeded in my book. I hope you enjoyed hearing about these movies that have been released on Netflix just this year. I reviewed The Lost Husband, which I rated a 5, Shine Your Eyes, which I rated a 7, The Stand at Paxton County, which I rated an 8, and All the Right Places, which I rated a 9. Here's to these movies offering you some inspiration. I am your host, Elizabeth Aaron, signing out. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask you to please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review that really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.